Good evening. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Christine Wallach, and I'm a trustee of the Academy. It's my pleasure to welcome you all for this evening's Carl von der Heyden reading by our fellow Carole Maso, Professor of Literary Arts at Brown University. We're delighted to have Carole read this evening selected parts, we don't know which parts, from her novel In Progress, The Bay of Angels. Early in her stay with us, earlier this year, Carole held a similar reading at the Sony Center in a Mongolian yurt that was set up there. On that occasion, she spoke about her process of novel writing, which includes writing by hand, a skill many of us no longer have, and of arranging and rearranging the elements of her narrative, with the result being a manuscript perhaps as tall as a child and spanning an extraordinary spectrum of content and style. I'm very eager to hear those parts of the novel that she's chosen to share with us this evening. It's a tradition here at the Academy for our fellows to ask a friend and expert in the fellows' field to say a few words before the lecture. And it's an honor to have this evening an American Academy alumnus, Lance Olson, to say something about Carole and her work. Lance was our Mary Ellen van der Heyden Fellow in Fiction 5 years ago, in 2013, and has been spending much of his time since then in Berlin, including as one of the artists in Berlin of DAAD. When not in Berlin, Lance teaches as a professor of experimental narrative theory and practice at the University of Utah. He also chairs the board of Fiction Collective 2, one of America's best-known ongoing literary experiments. He's the author of numerous books, short story collections, essays, and reviews, appearing in well-known journals in the US and elsewhere. As those of you know who have been with us before, we'll have time at the end of the lecture, Carole's reading, to take questions. And of course, I invite you all to a reception following the reading where there's more time for conversation. So without further ado, please join me in welcoming Lance Olson to the podium.
Hi, everybody, and welcome. It's such a pleasure to be back with family at the American Academy, where Andy and I were living and working in the spring of 2013. And our time here was incredibly transformative and carries with it some of our fondest Berlin memories. And it's such a deep joy this evening introducing a dear friend and fellow and an astonishing author, Carole Maso. So when I write sentences, she comments in Break Every Rule, essays on language, longing, and moments of desire, I am home. When I do not, I am damned, doomed, homeless. In the gloating, enormous strangeness and solitude of the real world, where I am so often inconsolable, marooned, utterly dizzied, all I need to do is pick up a pen and begin to write, safe in the shelter of the alphabet, back into the blinding waves, the topaz light, the fire. Carole has been one of the foremost innovative writers in the U.S. since the publication of her first novel, Ghost Dance, in 1986. Fed by the voices, visions, provocations, and possibilities named Samuel Beckett and Virginia Woolf, Thomas Bernhardt, and Theresa Cha, her work fuses and confuses poetry and prose, fiction with nonfiction, and often image with text in manifestations that sometimes feel like books, and sometimes like something closer to extended narrative music, shot through with a sophisticated intelligence, a deep understanding of literature, art, and philosophy, a committed political awareness, and a profound compassion. Ava, the novel of hers I teach most regularly in my graduate seminars, is emblematic of the rest. It is the story of a 39-year-old comparative literature professor during her last night on Earth. Suffering from a rare blood disease and confined to a hospital bed, her system flooded with morphine, she drifts among memory, hallucination, and quotations by her favorite authors. Both text and metatext, then. Eva is less novel than achronological linguistic symphony about how each of our lives accumulates around recollection, passion, and inevitable loss. I mention Eva because its protagonist returns in Bay of Angels, the manuscript on which Carole is working at the American Academy, and which has been nearly, I think, 15 years in the making, and stands very tall. In it, we find ourselves witnessing the events that unfold 5 years before Eva's final night. Now, however, the personal and the political are more tightly tethered. The subjective Bay of Angels argues is always already the social. The procedure Eva undergoes merges with various military horrors, from the Armenian genocide and the Holocaust to the Iraq War, and a fantasy involving an Ur woman who has apparently overseen some of the worst of what the human mind can imagine. Recipient of fellowships from the Lenan Foundation and the NEA, Carole is professor, as you just heard, in the Literary Arts program at Brown University, where she has taught since 1995, the year before we met there at a conference entitled Unspeakable Practices, hosted by Robert Coover. Although it turns out we also spent our childhood together, unwittingly separated by a mere 16 miles in Rusty, New Jersey. Me in an undistinguished town called River Edge, she, who got all the good towns, in William Carlos Williams's famous Paterson, daughter of a jazz musician and an emergency room nurse. That is, I've known Carole now for nearly 25 years, and I'm here to tell you she's one of the kindest, most affable, most thoughtful human beings on the planet. So let me leave you by way of illustration with an anecdote and a second quote. The anecdote. So when she visited the university at which I was teaching at the time, I one day asked Carole how she went about critiquing student work in her creative writing courses. And she answered she didn't believe in critique. Rather than making evaluative comments, she said, she posed queries in the margins of her students' work. That luminous pedagogical instant has always glowed in my mind alongside Roland Barthes' equally luminous observation. Literature is always the question, minus the answer. And the second quote, we write now into our extinction with surprising reserves of energy, Carole remarks in her contribution to fiction's present, situating contemporary narrative innovation, perversely embracing the motion toward our disappearance. From the erasures, from the negations, from the violence and assaults and trespasses and betrayal, from the love for all that passes, the novel in new forms will persist. It alone has the potential of coming closer than any other human document to the poignancy and terror of this moment. And with that, please help me welcome Carole Maso.
Thank you so much, Lance. Hello. I'd like to thank the Academy, and in particular Michael Steinberg, who is in New York tonight. It's extraordinary to be here and to be in Berlin, a city that has greatly moved me, a city so complex, so poignant, so sutured together, a city of sorrow and desire. While I've been here, I've decided to spend much of my time with the work of a few German artists and writers, and they have served as great inspiration and company, and have included Charlotte Salomon, Eva Hesse, Joseph Beuys, Anna Segers, Herta Müller, W.G. Sebald, Rebecca Horn, Isa Gensen, Hanna Darboven, Wolfgang Leib, and Haron Faraki. I would also like to thank my fellow fellows. I have so much admiration for you all. Chekhov says that art should prepare us for tenderness. But I have been caught off guard by the kinds of feelings I carry in my heart for all of you. I'm going to read from this massive novel in progress tonight, The Bay of Angels. It essentially spans a century from about 1915 to 2015. And it feels like I've been working on it for about that long. It's an enormous undertaking, and in many ways, I think my other 10 books have been an apprenticeship in order to write it. My method is something like this: deeply emotional tracks in different registers and genres are being laid down. And when juxtaposed or placed in proximities to one another, create a kind of new space, an associative resonance, a music or shimmer which is ordinarily outside the bounds of fiction. States of being and mind I cannot even remotely get close to in any other way. Charged, enigmatic, fugitive, fleeting, and beyond what I can consciously understand. Created largely through sensual, intuitive shaped emotion. So a living text, vulnerable, porous, and open, strange, something mortal and flawed and alive. I am animated, as the French writer Saint-Exupéry says, by invisible solicitations. Maybe I am running errands for a previous generation. Bachelard suggests, and the psychoanalyst Maurice Après says, when talking about the transgenerational transmission of trauma. I am placing a child's drawing, an opera libretto, a deeply deranged comic novella, historical documents, pastoral interludes, extravagant fictions, poetry, memoir, orts, scraps, and fragments side by side in my novel, where the century's wreckage might be felt as I rummage through the debris field in an attempt to grapple with our time and what it is meant to be here and to have had a human life. Profoundly mysterious, frightening, deeply mesmerizing, I am grateful for the enormous freedom this work affords. I feel a servant, essentially, driven by wordless internal imperatives. Beauty is summoning us, the great Russian filmmaker Andrei Tarkovsky says. And so I set out in these pages to meet it. I'm going to read different excerpts tonight because I wanted to sort of show you a little bit about what I'm talking about. So a variety of these things I'm calling tracks that I've been putting down. And first I will read a very brief excerpt from a very long narrative section called Lessons in Darkness 1. You may sense from the number 1 there that there are many of these lessons in darkness to follow. What has brought me to this place? Where has this material begun in me? Maybe it begins with my grandfather as a 5-year-old boy. And here's a little tiny part from that. Lessons in Darkness 1. The Ottoman genocide perpetrated against the Armenian citizens of Turkey was the first systematic attempt in modern times to bring about the complete, deliberate extermination of a people. This is dedicated to all the dispossessed and the dead, and for my grandfather, Sarkis Frank Igarian, a 5-year-old boy who survived. undeniably, despite the denials of the oppressor. The century, 15 years old at this interval, and already in ruins. Undeniably, despite the denials of the oppressor, in this case the Turks, Armenian corpses accumulate on the mountainside, while the herd of those who are still living, if you can call it that, are escorted 200 or 300 miles over mountains to their final destination, the Syrian desert, where those who make it that far will be left to perish. Relocated, if you like. Deported, if you like. Oh, the deportation, first, but certainly not last, euphemism of the century. In the end, 1 million die of starvation or hangings and beatings or disease or exposure. 1 million Armenians will have perished in the end. Welcome to the first, but certainly not the last genocide of the century. It is the summer of 1915. This track, and there are some tracks that sound something like this, begins with the starkness and ferocity of a document. And I think of René's Night and Fog, maybe. But it also simultaneously evolves, and there are two columns. One is this document of exactly what's happening, but in the other column is the story of an old man named Hagop, who has been sent off on the death march. In the moments before he perishes, and we know he will perish from what we're hearing on the other side with, real-time, real documents. The experience, in the moments before he perishes, the experiences in a kind of slow motion, the stations of his life are played out. He grows progressively younger until he is an infant by the end, playing with the braid of his mother by a shore. I think of my grandfather, just a child who survived. Maybe these pages spring from that 5-year-old who has never left my side. Or perhaps the book originates from the child I was, so in love with the world and its many wonders. The Bay of Angels opens in an autobiographical vein, remembering that child. But I am remembering her on a fateful day, the day in March, the 20th of March, 2003, when the United States invades Iraq. I can't tell you of the shame and betrayal and sadness we felt, the shock and the awe. And the headline in the New York Times read, "Troops enter a blacked-out Baghdad." This is what's happening on that day as I'm recalling an aspect of my past. And so this track is a more explicitly autobiographical or a version of myself. And I will appear from time to time in the novel's pages. A child learns to draw the letter A, and infinity opens. I am that child. There's an epigraph to this piece, World Book. For A is the beginning of learning and the door to heaven. Christopher Smart. One of the things I loved most when I was a child was to read from the Children's Encyclopedia, The Ice Age, the oboe, the migration of birds, the origin of oceans, and hours would pass in an instant as time warped and warbled and space seemed to expand into an oval, elongating shape, and I would vanish into those pages. Often I would find myself lost in the many wonders of the world then, an abacus, an acorn, an airplane, the silver world, falling into a half-trance I have never quite been able to lift myself from since. The velocity of light, the theory of tables, the point of indiscernibility, a logic of wings. The encyclopedia had been ordered by my parents from a man they said had come to our door in the night while we slept. I see him still in the gloaming, sitting on a park bench, gathering his courage and tomes. Evening. Curiously, my parents had understood these books to be a crucial, even urgent addition to our universe, a fact that has always fascinated me, for who among us could have guessed how perceptive they were? They were beloved creatures, mother with a bird's nest on her head, and father holding a burnished trumpet. Peace in our time, but to me they seemed utterly out of touch. How could they have known? So removed they seemed from the secret life of children, a fossil, a blue-striped feather, a carapace. We thought we roamed another world entirely, a chrysalis, a sarcophagus, an apple, our parents far off, some distant totem toward which we vaguely yearned. It strikes me now on reflection, and perhaps I see it better in retrospect, the house Ganta archetype, crimson roses, summer, that it was always I who was the one who was out of touch, and that I only imagine a pack of roaming sibling companions at my side. That clamor of children, the din, already back then receding. I look to the ceiling where the German airship, the Hindenburg, hovers. My gray cat recently deceased in the air like a blurred dirigible. After the news of the encyclopedias, weeks passed without another mention. Had we invented the whole thing, we wondered, as we stared out the window and watched the mailman make his silent rounds? It does seem preposterous now, a little man selling books in the night, every letter on every volume embossed in gold to light his way. What an odd time, the suspension between the knowledge of the existence of such books and their arrival. Weeks, or perhaps was it months later? It seemed like forever. That eternity strikes me, especially now, as we verge on something like World's End tonight, as one of the sweetest and most hopeful of my life. Who would I become? What was I to be? How to describe their strange presence, their weight in the end? I watched the boxes that October accumulate in the hallway until at last they complete were ceremoniously opened one evening after my father had been returned from his day. We placed each carefully on the shelves made especially to hold them. These tomes I would become so devoted to hold one of those shiny, strangely thin, but sturdy pages and a universe, foxglove, parallelogram, Tunisian basket weavers, cupola, indigo bunting would open. The neighborhood children gathered at dusk, released from their houses to paw at the pages. The World Book. Before me, the blossoming of all human knowledge. How quickly after that my classmates turned to shadow. Their games, their edicts, their petty clubs, taking on a kind of pallor and quiet until they receded altogether. Gone their whims, their exclusions. My vertiginous free fall into beauty had begun. That's just the very opening of, again, what's a very long section. And at the end, I'll read a little bit from the end of that section. So that's another track. That's another sound that moves through the book and that I can start to, through juxtaposition and positioning, create other kinds of, hopefully, evocative kinds of states. But perhaps it is neither of those things. You know, as I was thinking about it, preparing for this evening, when I think of what's drawn me and held me to the page, perhaps it's been the imagination all along, in all its terrifying and full splendor. And for me, the only way to get to certain things. And after all, I had devoted my life in many ways to fiction, and I had written many novels. So I'm going to read you a section like that next, and there will be these long passages of fiction. Lance was mentioning Eva Klein, who in my novel Eva, it is the last day of her life. But this book, Eva has not stayed at rest. This book, she's back, and it's 5 years earlier, and she is gravely ill, living in New York, and in the hospital, waiting to receive a bone marrow transplant from her mother, who, because she had a beautiful singing voice, survived Theresienstadt. The rest of her family, all from Berlin, including her mother's sister, Sophie, who was 7 months pregnant, died. Aunt Sophie was shot into a ditch in the snow. All had been transported from the Grunewald station, and Eva fantasizes that all the parents who have gathered and are about to get onto that train release their children into the forest nearby, where they might hide, change shape, escape through portals or fissures in the narrative, where they might have a chance. Beauty is summoning. It is the beauty of the face of the mother letting her child go into the dark forest, knowing full well she may never see her again. Beauty is summoning. It is the children's love for their small pets and their will to live. Here time becomes space. This is a line I've been thinking about a lot from Parsifal, which some of us are going to see tomorrow. And I have been thinking of it as I wrote the Armenian Lessons in Darkness piece, as well as this one. What might happen to time, and in Eva's mind, what might happen to time in Eva's mind as she tries to stave off what, in effect, has already happened? Can that time, before the inevitable, be forestalled, elongated, suspended, expanded, repaired? This, perhaps, is the unconscious errand she is on. I've thought of Parsifal, too, in terms of the larger architecture of the book because of its structure. Neither opera or drama or oration or oratorio. It's action and reflection, enmeshed and interwoven. And I'm curious, and I'm taken with the way the silences work in it, and the pauses, And so I have tried to build in silence and pause in my own work in a similar kind of way. So before I start this piece, the only other thing I need to tell you is that because it's a novel that traverses a century, many major figures from the 20th century will pass through these pieces. In this one, the composer Olivier Messiaen, who composed the quartet for The End of Time while in a German prisoner of war camp, will make an appearance, as well as the New York artist Joseph Cornell, an American self-taught artist who, working with found objects, pages from old books, dime store trinkets, transformed everyday materials into extraordinary universes. The piece begins with an actual quote from a parent during this time. There, remember, at the Grunewald station, they're releasing the children. I felt like a bad mother. For several minutes, I watched them thread their way among the trees, and then the darkness swallowed them. This piece, which is a fiction track, is called Kinder Totenwald. There's an epigraph, and the epigraph is, "We have packed our small suitcase. We have put Schnitzel in his carrier as instructed. We have been good children." Larks, doves, starlings in the forest palace, and no one there to witness their blurred music. The child cries, having been turned into a bird prematurely, more than once. The children cry at the strangeness. Oh yes, more than once, a bird each time, or was it an angel? Winged music. In Schönenberg, the violin case left open. In Charlottenburg, the cello confiscated, that word. The square all but deserted, fled is, stopped mid-chord, in the interval, left mid-passage, that music. First step of the child, and no one there to see. First word and no one. The predicted da, but no one. Word sucked, aspirated backward into, look, the safety zone, a dark forest. A congregation of word nymphs in a forest of da, 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 a shimmering chorus forest of voices singing da. What's that? Soul Grove. The children's choir singing without conductor. The children remember. They put a tick and a tock in the bed with the new kitten Schnitzel, so it might be consoled by the tick, not miss its mother so much. In preparation for my bone marrow transplant, I am practicing not missing so much. Holding in my hand a kind of lantern now as the anesthesia comes on, the illuminated swan box, beautiful, beautiful. Is that you, Mother, with your floating body shaped like a heart, your improbably long neck, the blue-white of your feathers? You give off a strange light. I carry you with me now wherever I go. A burial grove as they land on earth at last, the piney forest floor. See how light filters through the trees, how light comes and goes. Green gold, gold last, never die. A forest grove of hearts, souls, the patter through the leaves, a green and downy sheet of sounds. You make a most extraordinary music, a beautiful music boots cannot drown out, soldiers cannot outcount. We remember hiding inside every leaf, shining through the paper thin, chlorophylled a while. Winged music, the frightening forest palace. Where are we? Why, we're at the hunting palace, surrounded now by the passion of the animals, their pleasure catches, the beheaded adorning the walls. They check on Schnitzel meowing in his carrier, the intense fervor of the hunt. Look, over there, 2 children's heads in an alcove, Hans and Sophie Scholl. Even over a century away, my mother cannot bear the sound of counting. Memory locked in the structure of blood. Ready or not, here I come. The Germans staged a jolly hide and seek. Birds swooning, those who had gone before trying to warn those who would come after, ready or not, but we're not ready yet. Every leaf, 98, 99, 100, ready or not, just hum. When they confiscate that word, the violin, just hum. All the parts, here I come. When they confiscate the voice in its box, fall into white. Snow still falls in this forest like music. Snow falls on the unmarked graves, marking them. In the Grunewald forest, in the cemetery of the nameless, small birds, angels, a light, adagio. A child draws a swan in snow. A woman writes the letter D in air, remembering in a hospital bed. And who's that playing Fur-Elise on a phantom keyboard now? A winged music. In preparation for my bone marrow transplant, I am. Infinity of swan in a blue, night is falling box, you are dying, Eva Klein, tulle, sequins, a velvet curtain parting. An outdoor production of Swan Lake, the dance performed en plein air. Gerhardt takes out the swan box, fingering the heart-shaped body floating in its permanent twilight. Mother, now viewed through a kind of cobalt light. My twilight swan, come here now as a saving thing. Sever a vein, her impossibly long neck, her body like a heart, not so fast. In the marrow of the bone, where they inscribe messages, love letters of sorts, the blood secret code. Mother, future of blood, strategy of blood, morrow of blood and bone. The memories of blood, they were forbidden to keep carrier pigeons in the occupied zone, lest a message get through. But there, on the day of the liberation, thousands of birds, finally released, cover the sky. Children in transit. The wing beat hallucination. The perch deserted. How are you feeling, Eva Klein? It's nice of you to inquire. I am busy making bird boxes in the manner of the great Joseph Cornell, fashioned out of last things, in the event of, out of the last available scraps of, collecting this and that from this hospital room, feathers from the pillows, diamonds from the hospital gown, from the clock, a tick, a tock. In the bodies of birds, the children are alive again. How quickly they fly, having just deserted their perches, and they long for their lives back, their seesaws and counting games and rhyming games and mother. Their desire makes a dolorous sound, locked in the blood. The tree begins to toll. Mother, we are hungry, they cry. We just want to go to forest school, like the other children. Look, here's the map. It's located near the S-Bahn station, which is exactly where we are. It says there's a museum here that explains the magical world of the forest. And a school with microscopes and binoculars and magnifying glasses and stethoscopes and special boxes you can put your hands in and feel secret smooth things and sticky things and soft things. So we just like our hands back like the other children. And go on a family night hike when you finally return. We'll hear tawny owls and foxes and nightingales and smell special night forest smells. That's what the pamphlet says. This precarious perch fashioned from a drinking straw. I am fashioning a story now out of this and that, largely for consolation. And the Croatian mother goose passing through mutters, bury the bread, bury the bread, bury the bread. They may have left millet on the graves, one of the children say. Bury the bread, bury the bread, but we are starving. They may have left some millet. In preparation for my bone marrow transplant, I am holding a lantern, a bell of suet, a complete array of hospital supplies, Band-Aids and a plastic pitcher and drinking cups. I am braiding the wigs, throwing caution to the wind, memorizing her recipe for challah. Mother, my swan, who, in another room, in anesthesia's blue light, is donating her blood to this project. Joseph Cornell, roaming in otherworldly loneliness, collecting his loot at the edge of this scenario for the children, lonely in his whole life, looking for them. Lullabies in the night nursery, bury the bread, and on the third day, the bread will rise. Vortex suddenly of silence and birds against confiscate, that word. But we just want to be children again, not angels or birds or song. We just want our running legs back, please. But in the Grunewald forest, Eva whispers, the Prussians are known to enjoy a jaunty coursing sport, the running game where the hare is chased to the point of exhaustion and cornered by dogs and subsequently killed by the hunters hurrying behind. That's what the pamphlet says, run. I am hard at work here making my M-box, in which the magician, Olivier Messiaen, and the Madame will all make appearances. It helps a little, in which Mother, of course, it helps a little. I am reconstructing the moonlit forest, the pond, the swan, the vestiges of a useless late romanticism as another century closes against confiscate and fled is. Children are flying, that irresistible music against the blue sky of numbers counting backwards, the backward counting man. Da, take away da, equals da. At the absence of da, our Father. Where has he gone? Has anyone seen our kitten Schnitzel? It's awfully dark all of a sudden. Fled is that music. Wandering into the moonlight forest now comes. Wandering now into the moonlight forest, now comes the composer Olivier Messiaen, native of Avignon, noted ornithologist and rhythmician. Come to the quiet to listen and to play his music for his beloved birds. Where have they gone? He hears the sound of high blue. He dreams the banishment of temporalities, the sound. Hear how it is everywhere, everywhere, drawing us into a sense of, well, eternity. My precious birds, where have you gone? Come to me. Unfailing light, immutable peace, in the safety zone, come to me. And I will write you a liturgy of crystal, and I will write you a quartet for the end of time. The birds torn from their box, come back, and he plays them the clarinet. The children warble with delight against the abyss of time with its sadnesses and tediums. You are the opposite of time, he says, my starlings, my doves. You are the desire for light, for stars, and jubilant outpourings of song. A trilled chord, triple strobes from the tam-tam in the solemn moment of resurrection, and the distant melody of stars. You fly up, your blood begins to toll. Future, future, future. languid song of the bird, the passion artist falls to his knees, this sonic heaven, this world without end. Tonal and atonal, both or neither, C majorness blends with thickets of sounds, disconnected from harmonic or metric centers. Hear now the chattering, but we're not ready yet. Look, they point, in the distance rising out of the future, built on a hill made of rubble. It's Teufelberg, the listening station. But can anybody hear us? Can anybody at all hear us now? I am placing a stethoscope, a petition, a pamphlet, a prayer, a quartet for the end of time, why not, in the middle of the box. The sound really does exist in layers. It goes everywhere and nowhere, blissfully disconnected from harmonic and metric centers, to hear everything at once and then to focus on, who's that? Da, asleep, predictably, in the sound garden. Not another word about the absence of Da, Madame scolds. Not another thing said until Da makes his comeback, sometime late in the next millennium. Children are flying. From behind the thimble garden, he spies them, traveling every which direction in the silence, clutching violets and forget-me-nots, the kitten's clock. From behind the pane, a last grace note, the solo cello, Sibelius as the century turns at the edge of his face. The 107 virtuosos fall silent and wait for the eighth. A last extravagance, celebration, and we're drawn once more against our better judgment to the translucent bird box. Bury the heart, and on the third day, ready or not, you are a rare bird, Ava Klein. Falling and loving was everything once. The glass house is beautiful at this hour, n'est-ce pas? The music is nearly transparent. Danger is near. The hunters tromping through the forest. Yes, like your father, you loved flowers. Keep this. Columbine, delphinium, snowbell heart, larkspur, rose, trillium on the forest floor. I am making an M-box, and in it I am placing music. My father, just a boy, in his cello. At Theresienstadt, he said Sibelius's D minor became a saving thing, playing it for the officer who pined each night for his Finnish maiden. My mother sang, dare I say it, in that all but ended chamber ensemble, like a bird. She sang like a bird, and the officers applauded. See the little prodigy now as he wraps his hands in bandages, soaks his hands in a steaming bowl of rose water. Berlin, in that time before. Father, through the wire mesh, says Rose. Remembering. Remembering what? Rose. Bells do ring. Schnit, schnit, schnit. Schnit, schnitzel, the children call. Schnitzel, time transfixed, and the magician. Around the magician now the children gather. Mr. Cornell, the children cry, we never thought you'd find us here. Have you seen Schnitzel, our kitten? And silently the tall, impeccably dressed man in black top coat holding a shadow box smiles. He is blue-tinted, he is slow motion. He hands out little domes which encase dice, bisque dollies, charms of every kind, stamps and strings and a twilight swan. And he juggles tiny velvet boxes, little souvenir cases, keepsakes, a gift of glass bells, and he juggles his constellations in the night sky. He throws tulle and satin and glitter into the air, and the children gasp. A crystal cage holds a white dove, and the children cry out. He makes day arrive, showing them his sunbox, and he blows soap bubbles through a clay pipe, and he makes a box lined with forest moss as promised. Watch carefully, and he pulls starlings from his sleeve. The children clap and sing. Penny arcades, Nickelodeons, the soapy ovals become the planets. In this one moment only of utter delight and loveliness extreme, respite, his box of tenderness, a pigeon on his head, the rows of bread. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, all good children go to heaven. Repeat after me. The boy wrapping and unwrapping his hands, hiding in the body of his cello, very clevered, disappeared in, it's only music. I am making a D box, da, hoping you might call off your dogs. Bells do ring still against the blue solitude. Wings flapping make a music. Still, starlings, starlets in a box, and he holds a luminous egg in his flat palm. Mr. Cornell, elliptical hints of the fled bird box. Not yet, he whispers, his arm a perch. A bird appears, a bird vanishes, all is ephemera in the cobalt zone. Bury the heart, and on the third day the heart will rise. Don't look so surprised. And he shows them a box lined with trees. The birds fled, and he shows them many things. Climb into my dovecote boxes, all of you children, the magician cries. The safe heaven of his dreams, little bird wings. My pigeon nooks, do not make a sound. Each child enlarging his solitude, he looks at these luminous, otherworldly creatures and smiles. 1,000 wings cover the sky. And 3 objects rest on his arm, a metal globe, a hollow cube, and an oval bead painted red and pierced with a hole. Fly, fly off, fly up and away, always the next batch of children. The weary magician pats their heads. Yes, he imagines bringing sweets to them someday. Strudel and Kuchen and birthday cake, petit fours, ice cream sodas, pure delight, but they are blue-tinted, slow motion now. Bon voyage, he glumly waves. Do not move or make a sound. Monsieur Olivier Messiaen takes a solemn bow. Do not move. The last silver bells ring with a faint, flawed note, or make a sound. Longing without end. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. I am making a box of heaven in the event that all else fails. Come quickly now, they're coming. The magician trembles against the vacuum of children. Quiet now, stay in your hiding places, do not move. Such quiet all of a sudden, such silence. Bon voyage, he wanly waves. Bon voyage, he wanly waves. Adieu, he whispers, looking up at the serene irony of the eternal blue. That's Mallarmé, n'est-ce pas? I am building an M-box in my free time, my remaining time. Tick, tock, spare them. The last wing flapping, shadow birds against a lovely scrim. He closes his eyes. The departure of birds he prays. Quickly now, a child escapes. Quickly now, climb back in. Do not move. It's a good game, or make a sound. In the near distance now, the hunters. Ready or not, they shout. Ready or not, here we come. The stomping sound, the breaking boughs, the heaving breath, and time stops, and time, for one moment, stands transfixed. And the hunter, too, cannot believe his eyes. Well, well, look what we have here. Look, my friends. My. It's a little Findelkind. But that is not a little Findelkind, the children shout in unison. That is Schnitzel. And they are found. Everyone into the box now, Eva commands from her hospital bed. And the composer and the magician grab the children and the kitten and close the lid and flee. Disappear now when I count to 3. So that's... So that's another field, another narrative field. And Ava will often be in a highly vulnerable psychic or physical state. And so it allows me to take her, or she takes me, into these other kinds of places. So that's another thing that is happening. There is another field, and that is a kind of, let me see if I have, a kind of darkly erotic strain throughout the entire novel. And it again serves as a kind of engine and a kind of thing that is absolutely necessary to the architecture of the whole. And perhaps in part the question becomes how to weather the melancholy effects of survival and how to find ways to stay alive and how to navigate or negotiate or fight for aliveness. And largely through Ava, we will get a number of these kinds of scenes. She has, by 33, she's had 3 husbands, and the 4th will arrive before she dies, and countless lovers. And you will hear many, many episodes of this throughout the text. I had wanted to read a part in full, just because they're fun to read, but I'm not going to because I want to get to some of the other things before probably my time is already up. And so I will read you this brief part of one section so you can get a sense of this, track. Here, for the first time, Ava, who is 33 at this point, sees the teenager who will shortly become her 3rd husband. So that's where we are here. His name is Carlos. Okay. And you'll hear a very different voice from Ava at this point. And part of what interests me is having the large and operatic next to the most simple kinds of statements and the most simple kinds of pieces next to one another to create this thing. I'm in my green velvet dress again, with the streamers at the shoulders, in the ballroom turned crimson at the Machado House, where we have come to honor the great writer and statesman M. Dignitaries have gathered, among them the Countess Christina Leonore and her teenage son. There is a profundity to the body and a madness. Oh, someone sighs. There's her son Carlos making his usual entrance. Who is that? Ava inquires. Oh, no one important, Ava Klein. And half your age, by the way. He appears to be bleeding, having somehow cut his hand on the punch bowl. Rather dramatic, don't you think? And now coming this way. Green, how much I want you green, he says. He turns to me in my dress with streamers. A wind moves through the body as if through olive trees. He limps to the periphery. God knows why he's limping, holding his reddened paw. And I follow, drawn irresistibly to this bleeding Spanish saint reciting Lorca. I secure a linen napkin as a bandage. There is a profundity to the body and a madness. It harbors darkness, sadness, bells, a strange joy, deep song. The punch bowl shatters. Something is lit on fire. The distinguished writer speaks. Confetti and birds fall. Champagne floats by in flutes. I'm alive for a nanosecond on this beautiful burning earth. In the cloud forest, in the abyss of tears, the garden of lamentations and ecstasy, his blood blooming through the linen and ice scooped from the silver bucket. And already I am burning under his bleeding hand on this spinning earth. His body makes the room, drenched in red, spin. From the body emerge larks, nightingales. From the body, longing, deep song. Emanating from the body, the scent of jasmine and wolves. Green, how much I want you green. The body grows wings, sings in new languages, creates philosophies. The body retains what the mind lets go. As one wakes heavy, leaden, having forgotten the tragic news in the night, the body recalls it, harbors ruins, sorrow, keeps what the mind cannot. I'm alive for a nanosecond. I am alive and burning under his bleeding hand. But he's barely half your age. Obviously a teenager, Ava Klein. Is that what he is? For I have not dared looked at him. The hairs on my arms stand on end, and there is a low call from the small of my back, and already I feel him brushing up against me, but so gently as to be imperceptible, as if a kind of torture. Look, it's the Countess now, coming in for the kill. Not even you, Ava. Whispers in the room, and a scarlet scrim descending. The Countess comments on my green dress, that particular shade, quite interesting, pulling her son away. He turns to me, his blood gaze blazing, and wordlessly we leave the room, knowing things as only the body can know them. I dreamt we were alive. How many times after would our blood bloom as on that first night? I dreamt of the passage of the moon. I dreamt of the passage of the moon across the sun, the violet shadows, and the birds quiet, and the darkness, and the weeping body, and the body that each night voyages beyond the boundaries of the body. It is not infinity, but it is something like it. That expansiveness, that awe, impossible to fathom. The words blur, and the feelings grow more and more imprecise, yet more intensely felt. Those fugitive nights. It goes on. How are we doing for time? Does anybody know? Are we okay for time? Yes, the fellows say. Another track or thing I wanted to do in the novel, and I believe the novel can hold everything and contain everything and is the container of the uncontainable, are essays. I thought, well, I would like to think about existence, for instance. And there are a series of sort of metaphysical essays or essays of different sorts within the book. But of course, the essays don't look like ordinary essays, because I've been really interested in investigating the shape of thought and trying to get down, or approximately, something of what thinking is for me. And being around the scholars all the time, it's sort of glorious to think about how thinking gets done and how my thinking is very different than certain kinds of thinking, and what kind of shapes might thinking take on. For me, an essay might reflect the mind's passion, rigorous and engaging the intellect in the most urgent ways, and reach toward understanding or knowing something, though certainly not reaching toward it in traditional ways. There's a real longing. As I think these pieces start to long for each other, they start to talk to each other, they start to be in some kind of, without me conversation. Anyway, these essays seem to do a little bit of that too. I find for me, in order to think at all, and I have never been a linear thinker, and so, but I do know I think. So what does that look like? I need a certain kind of spaciousness. You know, I need a certain kind of space in which to make messes and to think wildly, to go on tangents, to, you know, be wrong or be uncertain or whatever else might happen. And that I need this in order to get a necessary freedom and energy and rigor and exuberance without the usual strictures, because with the usual strictures, I just, you know, I can't work. And so in my essays, I've noticed that other things have infiltrated, other things have infiltrated. Snow has an enormous presence in this novel. For Ava, who is constantly trying to imagine and reimagine and retrieve her Aunt Sophie from the ditch she was shot into as the snow fell. But as hard as she tries, the snow keeps covering her back over. And so when I thought about maybe trying to think about existence a little bit, I thought maybe I could try to think about it through thinking or having a meditation about snow. And that might be the way in to thinking about these other things as well. So it's called A Treatise on Snow. And it's on existence. Again, because of the way the novel is imagined, major figures from the 20th century keep appearing all over the place. In this one, the outsider artist Henry Darger from Chicago, Illinois, will make his appearance. He wrote a 15,000-page, maybe it gives me, you know, comfort, 15,000-page illustrated novel, which was called In the Realm of the Unreal, which was only found after his death. And one of the things he loved to do was to chronicle the weather. And over a 10-year period, he kept a weather log. The weather for him being at once scientific, allegorical, and divine. So he will appear with his weather reports. And he's very much an outsider artist, as they're called, self-taught, reclusive. And the Bay of Angels is filled with outsiders of every imaginable sort. And there is a novel within the novel about a complicated, difficult madame in a somewhat of a resistance in France, protecting these outsiders. But the Bay of Angel is filled with these sorts of people, including the girl I was and the woman I have become, despite how it may appear. That's how I feel. Also, the great poet Paul Celan will appear, who has wrestled the German language into a shape he might bear and work in. And he will come in these pages through his snow poems. He will also appear as a child in a pageant, wanting to play, as he says in his great poem, the snow part. So we haven't had much snow here in Berlin, much to my extreme disappointment. But on the few days we did, I worked on this really hard. And maybe I'll be able to hear if it's an essay or not. Maybe you can help me with that, too. Okay. Everyone that year talked of the pallor, complained about the ghastliness of the winter, its length, its severity. People felt compelled to write letters to the editor. Others formed snow groups where they could speak freely of their despair. Only the children fled the fire pit and played. Winters past were documented in the weather log of one Henry Darger, snow day by snow day, chronicled with care. There was the kind of snow you hardly ever see anymore. There was the dark snow, the angel snow, the snow globe snow, the rabbit fur, Snub Dub the Evangelista, the ghost sonata, the white rose. From behind the snow wall, entire villages, snow huts, snow towers, snow parapets. Poured over with devotion from his perch in the weather tower, Henry documented with love the properties of snow, the dream life of snow, snow as music, snow as death knell, apples and roses and snow, etc., and the 8 snowfall rate accumulations, light snow, snow showers, moderate snow, heavy snow, falling rose snow, illuminated falling, dustings, squall. Henry, what is a snow flurry? Snow flurries are the lightest form of snow precipitation. They are often brief in duration and very light. It is classified as snow that meets the visibility requirements for light intensity snowfall. Henry, why did God make us? We don't know. But snow babies were made by several German firms, excuse my German, Hertwig, Bahr, and Proschild, and Hahn and Gebrüder Heuerbach, for instance. Snow babies are delightful, measure a few inches, they are made of bisque and covered with a snowy-looking grout. They are generally thought to have been manufactured from 1850 up to 1915, when the Great War interrupted the German export of these dolls permanently. Had her body ever been recovered, we could have found one in Sophie's pocket. It was snowing, as we know, when Sophie was shot into the ditch. Sophie should like to lose herself in the crystal geometry of snow. To bring it up close, prisms, hexagons, columns, conical, symmetrical, sectored, bulleted, plated. It could go a long way to calm those shapes in such a blizzard as this. Visibility is poor. There's a 90% chance of heartbreak. They appear fern-like or like tiny, tiny trees through the white smoke. Some snowfalls are made up almost entirely of these snowflakes, stellar dendrites. If she had the word, it might help. Thin and light and making a pretty powder, she sinks to her knees. The stars are everywhere, and the snow roses, those Rosetta shapes falling large as planets onto her shoulders. A little boy with snow feet, snow mother, do not succumb. She gets up. There is gunfire, but the mother is standing. The space before her radiant, made more so just before it is vacated. Witness the shimmer at this last minute, before the guns are raised. This time she unfolds a scroll, the Snowflake Table. The physicist Ukichiro Nakaya created the first systematic classification scheme of snowflakes. An extension of his table by Magano and Lee in 1966 includes 80 different snow crystal types. And there, the stellar dendrites. She might like to write the Children's Guide to the Earth. She might like to write a little history of falling things, or a treatise on the covered world. Under the snow, the garden sleeps, she might begin. Or a beginner's guide to the universe, the world as she saw it, the snow babies in their white cups. She loves everything that survives its disappearance. Meanwhile, inside Strindberg's dream play, the Colossus Romulus slumbers. Summer comes on. Behold, that verdant, that impossible green. But even now, in the mind's hollow, snow collects tonight. See Ava in her isolation, traversing the white, the deep, toward sleep. Snow pit and shear tests should be conducted frequently during your outing, especially if you are crossing several different slopes or types of terrain. Be sure to carry your avalanche beacon, and that it is set to the transmit position. In an avalanche, you only have 30 minutes tops to survive. Try to reach a hand through the snow, if at all possible, or a foot or a pole, so you might be seen. Survival decreases with the time your body is buried. Overnight, the blizzard called Petra had arrived, bringing Germany to a standstill. High winds, whiteout conditions, stranded on the Autobahn, the old woman falls into a pure white delirium. She sees the white rose open, and from the balcony, leaflets fall into an atrium in March. Into an atrium in Munich. You know that, those white rose people. And high, high up, the Edelweiss falling from the sky, untouched, alpine star. Swerving off an icy street, a little family hits a tree and falls permanently asleep. Visibility diminished. Visibility is poor. Petra, the lover whispers in his white bed, and she fills his mouth with snow. What chance do we have? Hitler had a scheme to defeat Great Britain by utilizing a fleet of snow machines. Tons of snow would fall from zeppelins and paralyze the country. The top people devised the snow plan, but the British found the lab and killed the snow scientists and grabbed the plans. The snow zeppelins would have been the size of 3 football fields and able to cover 400 square feet. 20 were being commissioned. Do the math. England would be debilitated. An elite crew of Schneehandlers were to man the Zeppelins. Artificial snow has a misshapen character. Reading her old friend Baudrillard, but growing tired now, Ava puts down the book. The page whitens. It's not so bad that her Aunt Sophie disappears, she thinks. That she has come to terms with. But that she continues to disappear again and again and again, that was intolerable. Stay gone. Was that too much to ask? She waves to her father at the snow door. What is it you want, Father? He writes the word apoptosis above the frame in chalk. Apoptosis, if she remembers correctly, is the process by which a cell is pre-programmed to die. Apoptosis, once the coveted missing link in the crossword. Is it the real we worship or its disappearance? I should like to play the fugitive, the one who flees the scene entirely. This, the melancholy after effects of survival. I should like to play the snowbell heart, the first flower of spring. Snowdrifts collecting in the time crevices. The rustle of crepe paper, crinoline can be heard. In the pageant, I should like to play the snow part, the little child says, stepping to the fore. His voice slices the theater space. All eyes look to the boy. At once the backstage bustle ceases. Roles were being assigned for the winter solstice pageant. The director was impressed. If you are sure, the boy is certain. I should like to play the snow part. Other children step forward. I should like to play either Santa Lucia, the candles, or the ice. I should like to be the one who fills the asylum with white flowers. A column of snow bisque babies gets up and stretches and toddles marches to the door. I should like to play the snow part, the little boy says again, stepping forward, tugging at the woman who stands before the ditch. Yes, of course, she says, and pats his head. He smiles and takes her hand now and recites his part into the cavern before him. Snowfall, denser and denser, dove-colored as yesterday. Snowfall, as even now you are sleeping. White stacked into the distance, above it endless, the sleigh track of the lost. I should like to play the ghost in a fancy dress gown. Blanche comme la neige, she sings. And Sophie places a snowpack on her niece's feverish head. I should like to play the bride. She takes the script. But what is left but bondage and darkness? The children gather from every direction and stare into the fire pit. I should like to play the Arctic child on the top layer of ash, cremated after its death. Did you know that a child's bones were the earliest human remains found in the Arctic? The fragments were found in a fire pit. Only 20% of the child is left from 11,000 years ago, but that is enough. Sophie imagines the hidden, the thousands under the avalanche, or the water, or the ash. Still, as always, the children, undeterred, are making snow cakes drizzled with maple syrup and colored sugar. For fun, they like to say the chap from Saskatchewan, and laughter would emanate from the spot from which they collapsed in a pile, having fallen over with glee. That's a tongue twister. A pile of mile-high, snow-suited babies burrowing now into the snow pit. And the boats are asleep under the snow, and the river is frozen and stopped, and snow is on top, and the fish are asleep underneath. And then, all of a sudden, as if by chance, the Gulliver happened upon, ice-encased. A snow child recognized him right away as she turned her face away. The great Romulus does not stir, morphine-fueled, seen from the window where icicles hang, the shutters half open, snow up to the casements, next to him a woman's dark silhouette. Beside her a bowl of water or vapor or snow. The great Romulus in the bed, he does not stir. In her hand a last tablet, a lozenge, a salve. When she moves to the window frame and looks out through ice, I hide. It is not my time yet. Nor is it the time of the infant. Down the snow path, I note where a small group of mourners has gathered in preparation. But it is not for me that they have come, nor for the child. I fall into sleep a while. The asterisk named the Vice Rosa streaks across the sky. Snow falls. In the rooms, the windows are buried, and there is a bright gloom. In the room, which is turned into a tomb, and against the gloom, the children and their games persist, starring, yes, the chap from Saskatchewan, as I fall into sleep. And the benevolent Romulus is arranged with hands across the chest, as is the custom, and wrapped in felt and fat, is taken out now, at last, in a toboggan. The snow so high. One hoped the transition to be smooth. The large figure accompanies the sled, a consoling presence. Hooded, she's shepherding souls from this world to the next, from this white pasture to that one, yonder, farther than the eye. In a room I encountered her once. Left behind on the night table a few last items. From the dollhouse, long abandoned and inhabited by mice, a tiny German silver-etched candlestick retrieved from the tiny parlor, and a cracked cup at the last moment as the snow fills everything up. And now, pressed up against an iron grate, flames. The great Romulus is burning. Everyone in the village can sense it. The mourners fan the fire and it grows. Fire on snow. Ceremoniously, the undertaker tips his hat. Ordinarily, it would be the day's 5th fire, he announces formally through snow, but the Romulus takes all day to be consumed. The children scream, fleeing the fire pit to play while the colossus burns. Hey, look! White roses and cinders and smoke up above the trees, indicating a safe and painless passage. The Romulus strapped to the toboggan and the fur doll he cradled, all of it gone to ash. Leave your sleep, the Arctic child whispers, smiling into the place where the ear once was. In the fixed glass eye of the rabbit, the one thing to survive the fire, one might perhaps have understood something of the strangeness of existence, the mystery of the snow, the sorrow of the smoke, the enigma of the republic, or the hidden meaning in the pageant. But having fallen asleep for a prolonged moment in the snow tomb, I did not see the eye, or the Arctic child, or the benevolent Romulus who had been our monarch and had promised so much, or the snow rabbit he had cradled, or his beneficent smile on whose existence we had relied. The snow made everything feel so far, and now in a minute and definitively the Gulliver was wafted into the distance where he became a white speck. Come back, Henry called, as if it were a game. He loved every aspect of the snow project. In the snow log, he records a day of heartache, snow erase, vacancy, casting of the pageant, momentarily put on hold. In memory of Romulus Linney. I should probably stop. I was going to return to World Book, but perhaps are there questions? Or if there are not, I can keep reading. Questions? Yes. Ren. Oh. Can you hear me with this?
Yeah, very well.
Okay.
Hi, I'm your fellow. Ran.
Hello, Ran.
Hi. I'm fascinated with the persistence of childhood longings and childhood reaching and childhood fascination and love, and that it insists in you and it insists again and again in your writing. And yet in your writing, I'm not feeling you turning your back on the lush territory of the adult. I can feel the adult in your eroticism and so many of your voices. Can you talk a little bit about this threshold between the child and the adult, and in which of these states you connect?
Well, because the book is so many pages, I tried to find reading that might cohere in some way, and so decided to focus on children. And children are, for this reading in particular, I'm not sure it's representative of the kind of ways in which the book would be perceived otherwise. But it felt important, and it feels important for several reasons. One of them is this notion of Sophie having been 7 months pregnant when she dies, and that child trying to escape through these other kinds of means, and Ava continually trying to rescue on some level. And also something else that you don't know, but which informs a lot of this, is that a year before Ava is in the hospital with this, for her bone marrow transplant, she has had a stillborn child. And so that too will start to find its own life within the book. And so those things become very important. But I would say that, I think many artists are more children than not, and that notion of just a wonder, and that notion of fear, and that notion of the kinds of things that we grow up and work to keep in check, is not something I've ever been able to do. And in fact, the work requires I not do that. And so that becomes part of the kind of daily drama of walking through the world, porous, and it acting on one, and it, directing and dictating the work, too.
Thank you.
Okay, I think we have time for one more question. So, or perhaps anyone in the audience who's not a fellow? Lest we monopolize. Yeah, sorry.
Hi, Carole.
Hi.
So is the sequence of the tracks determined by the sequence in which you created them, or are you rearranging as you go along?
No, they're not at all in the sequence I've created them. They are very much choreographed and very much deliberately kind of put against one another. Or, I do have this reputation for writing longhand, and I just put out the papers like all along the floor and then move them from place to place and see how very, very differently they read, and the kinds of accumulation situations and mysteries they create through those very, very deliberate choices. So it's not at all how I compose them. Often when I compose them, I have no idea where they will go or why they're even being written, you know. So it's a lot of trust, and it's a lot of faith, and it's a lot of just surrender to it.
Thank you.
Last question? Yeah. So, right microphone.
Amy Remensnyder, fellow. So, Carole, I wanted to ask you about music. You just used the word compose, and music comes through both in terms of the presence of the musicians, and then also I know you write to music, and then at certain points when you're really into your reading, you're chanting. So I just wondered if you could talk about music and how that shapes you as an artist.
It's crucial. I mean, it is one of probably the main influence on my work. You know, my father was a jazz musician, and as a child, and a melancholy one because he had too many children to actually pursue music in a real way. And so to be near him, we would lie on the floor next to him and listen to music all day on Saturdays and Sundays. And so that sense of it, equating it with love for one thing, and then equating it with the way to speak to him at all. You know, I would have to write music if I wanted to speak to him because he was very silent and he was very kind of in that world. And so that, I think, on one level became something I wasn't aware of till, you know, I was 40 or something. But then when I handed him a book and he got it, it was because it was it was Ava, and it was a musical text more than anything. Then I also had, you know, 15 years of, you know, horrible piano lessons that I hated every minute of, but in fact has totally informed, you know, the sort of ways I hear and the kinds of ways in which I compose. And I do feel that, you know, most fiction or most prose relies on literal meaning as opposed to different kinds of meaning. You know, the weight of words, the pressure, the sound, that carries as much meaning as the literal meaning does. And yet and poets know this, but most prose writers think, no, I just got to get to you know, but they lose out on an entire other world of extraordinary, rich, associative, and, you know, again, things that resist a literal, linear way of working on one. You know, we barter in ordinary language every day, but what the language itself and what is dormant in it and what it is capable of is, you know, I'm no match for it. It's an extraordinary thing because I could spend my whole life. And, you know, it's the reach that is beautiful, but I know it's just this extraordinary thing. And for me, I like writing novels because I don't feel like much happens in most novels. I'm really bored by most of them because they haven't exploited the musical aspects or any of the other kinds of aspects that it might, you know, think about holding. So, yeah.
Thank you, Carole.